So, hello and welcome to this Wednesday webcast from the Adoption and Fostering podcast with me, Al Coates, and my esteemed guest. That's
Fiona
you.
Wells.
I was going to say.
Sorry, I was waiting for you to say it.
All right.
Just for the awkward silence.
It's fine. It's fine. I do awkward silence really well. I would like to apologise for Scott not being here because Scott was planning to be here, and just about 15 minutes ago he messaged me, and some personal circumstances occurred, which were quite were very important, and he hates missing lives, mainly because I think he's worried that I'm going to take over the world and go rogue and ruin his reputation. But I just want to sending all my love and warm, fluffy feelings towards Scott tonight, because I know he's having a bit of an evening with it, and he would be here if he could be here. So does that feel like a justifiable amount of warm fluffery around Scott not being here?
Yeah, thinking of you, Scott. Missing you.
Excellent. So this evening, I'm talking to Fiona, and people may recall Fiona's been on the podcast a few times, probably last summer now, is maybe summer, you came on.
Yeah.
But some people may not know who you are. So could you give us an introduction to who you are and why in the world of adoption you've got some skin in the game?
Very flattering. Thank you very much. I am adopted, an adopter and a social worker, and a couple of years ago I became a little bit overwhelmed by some of the challenges facing families in adoption, where there was seemingly a bit of a crisis within the child's behaviour, for instance, and this led to difficulties, and then they weren't getting the support required to stay together as a family or to continue as a family, often facing some adversity from professionals, let's say. So I released a document last year with the voices of 33 adopters who'd faced challenge and crisis, and who wanted to share their views and experiences on some of the issues. Since then, I feel like I've had a great year in a way. I've had loads and loads of conversations with loads and loads of really important people, such as Emily Frith from Adoption UK. I've spoken to Social Work England. I've spoken to Ofsted. I've spoken to people at the Department of Education. I've spoken to people at Adoption England themselves. Lots of different organisations, charities, RAAs, including my own. And yeah, so there's been a brief little wave of sort of recognition of the issues that I'm highlighting. I've also got a lot of people engaging with me on their own experiences, which is amazing. And I'm really grateful to all of them, because they work with me and they help me to carry on what we're concerned about as adopters.
Yeah. I mean, I have sort of stood and watched sort of slightly from afar, maybe occasionally held your coat in some of that stuff, occasionally. And do you know what? I can't remember how we met. I can't remember how we were introduced. But anyway, that seems irrelevant now. I'm going to have a really serious think about how we got to know each other. But were you expecting, you wrote this, you gathered the voices of this community of people whose experience of adoption in terms of adoption sort of being disrupted, but also in terms of people sort of finding themselves really struggling for support, acknowledgement of the challenges, finding systems not able to sort of get the system not able to get its corporate head around the issues at foot. Did you think that there was going to be this positive effect? What was your best sort of hope for the report?
Well, I remember speaking to you about it. It was November 2022, around the first time we ever spoke. And, you were cautious, as in the sense of it takes a lot to change. And I suppose at the start I was like a fish out of water, a bit naive, thinking, well, somebody highlights the obvious that's going wrong. And it has been a bigger battle to start with. But now I look back and think, do you know what? It's gone quite well. I don't mind being a gobshite, and I don't mind putting my foot out and saying, look, this isn't right, and we need to change this. And I do that as an adopter and somebody who's adopted, who would have wanted my parents to get the support. I wasn't the most easy child, but I didn't go through early life trauma. I was relinquished. So it's very different. So when I look at what the world would look like for me as a child, I think, my God, what if my parents needed support and didn't get it? What if they weren't understood? What if people tried to put the blame on them that the things weren't working as well as they should? Fundamentally, and as I try not to be negative, I try to look progressively and look at pathways that we can build to make a better future for adoptees and adopters and SGO carers and all the rest. But you do have to focus on the negatives sometimes. And unfortunately, adoption or permanence planning doesn't take consideration of trauma. And I think my biggest thing is there's been a lot of people receptive to that. And I think there's a lot of frustration and a lot of awareness and knowledge being built around what the impact of trauma is on children who are sadly removed from birth families.
Can I ask a bit more about that then? Because I would say that, well, I hear a lot of people talk about the language of trauma. I see, I've not been on a preparation course for donkey's years. My adoption being a long time ago. When you say there's no awareness of trauma, I find that really hard to actually believe. What do you mean? Are you saying something I don't quite understand? Because I think, or is it in the wider system, maybe within the adoption community? Or is
I think everybody knows what trauma is. Everybody knows that we have to be trauma informed, or we have to be trauma trained, and we all have to look at what children are going through. But what does that mean to a family is the bit I'm on about. It's the bit where we're sat in a family unit and how that child navigates the world, their world in that family as well. So I come from a holistic point of view as looking at the whole family. Obviously, the child is at the centre of all of this. Everything we talk about, even when I'm very parent focused, the child is always at the centre. But for me, trauma is bigger than just a word or just a concept or something we listen to in training as social workers. We need to fundamentally know what that means to each family. So, for instance, if a child has attachment issues and they're not diagnosed and they go to school and they navigate school life okay, and then they come home and spend their night kicking off, what does that look like to the outside world? Well, it's unseen, it's invisible, it's unheard until that parent says, I need help.
Well, that's a really interesting example because it's probably quite common, isn't it? It's this idea, we would maybe describe that in terms of it's a child who's masking in one environment and then that manifesting in another environment. But you could also imagine how that could be interpreted a different way in terms of, that's a child who's happy at school and really unhappy at home, and there's something going on at home. And is that what you're talking about? Is that we've got the basic facts, we kind of understand children's behavior, parents' behavior, but it's interpretation and what lens are we using to look at behavior and how that manifests in a house.
Yeah, so for me, and I just want to be really mindful that when I started Patch, as it's called, Passionate Doctors Targeting Change with Hope, I hadn't actually faced adversity from my local authority asking for support. I'd faced not getting any, and I'd faced challenges of assessments and waiting time frames and all the rest of it, but I hadn't faced any criticism. I have now, so I've joined that sort of, sadly, that group of people who faced blame for not managing challenging, difficult situations at home. For me, it's about making sure you are looking at every angle of the context of the family's history, the family's story. I don't mean going into it as with a magnifying glass. I mean making sure you're listening and you're checking and you're really trying to understand the information, and you're not just making assumptions. And it's looking at that whole family's lived experience. Because if you don't look at what the parents are going through, you'll never strengthen them. You can never make things better for that family if you're not looking at the parents as well as the child.
And that's maybe a skill set that's that's maybe not outside of some practitioners' kind of toolbox. But also, do you think that that maybe reflects broader issues with the system itself, in that it is very child focused, which is absolutely right. I mean, we have to acknowledge that there's been some, there's terrible things happen to children, and even within the last year or two, there's the case of adoptive parents whose behaviour led to a child dying. So
Yes.
we're not saying that adopters should be universally threat with some sort of like, oh, they're saints, that narrative. But do you think that sometimes it's just a lack of resources to actually undertake sort of a systemic approach to a family? Because I know that's what it feels like it needs.
I suppose I'm a bit more negative than you are. In a way, yes, absolutely 100% agree that the doctor's not perfect, and that we develop issues, or we already had issues that were hidden. So absolutely, child protection, when it comes to any family, needs to be done appropriately and properly. But when it comes to this, as a social worker who's worked child protection, who's worked duty and assessment, who's done it majoritively most areas of child social work, I'm inquisitive about why there's no process or protocol or policy around a family in this type of crisis. So I've been a parent to 3 children for nearly 12 years, each one with their own battles and struggles. When I go to the post-adoption team, I get assessments and it says, yes, this child struggles with that, and this child's going to navigate the world in this way. And then I go over to the local authorities child protection team, assessment team, and they say, well, mum's this and mum's that. What I'm saying is we need a better process that considers the whole context. So, for instance, we have unaccompanied asylum seeking processes. We have processes for pre-birth assessment, or concealed pregnancy, or sexual harm assessments, things like that. For me, what we need is a specialist process for children who've experienced early life trauma and are struggling to navigate the world after. So that could be SGO, fostering, adoption, kinship care, you name it. We're not fundamentally not addressing the profound impacts of trauma with the systems that we've got currently in place.
And that, yeah, I know. I guess that the platform we're standing on is adoption, but actually, that, like you're very clearly saying, is that this isn't an exclusive issue. This is an issue that, and if anything, we're probably if you think about that community, our children are the minority community. SGO's something like 200,000 children, and fostering 100,000. So I think there's only 70,000 adopted children. So we're the minority group. So that any change that we may be able to push for is going to benefit lots of other children.
And it's about positive change. So I have to highlight the negative, and I have to be critical, and I have to say the horrible words, blame and shame. But I want change to be really positive for future generations of children who are adopted, because I love my parents and I'm really grateful I was adopted. Now, my children, regardless of what our situation is now, absolutely love me and I love them. And that's what I'm fighting for. So regardless of what happens or what they do to me or what happens in our relationship, I will love them for the rest of my life. Not just until they get to 18, but the rest of my life. And Patch is part of my life now, because that's what I fight for. I've given a day a week to this now. This is what I do. I want it to change. But I can only speak as an adopter, social worker. I can't speak as a foster carer. I can't speak as an SGO carer. Yeah. So I'm really mindful of that, but I'm really careful about considering the comparisons. How many SGO breakdowns are there? How many kinship care breakdowns, fostering, disruption, notice, 28 days notice given, and, teenagers ending up in residentials who should be too young for residentials, in my opinion. There needs to be a different process. There needs to be learning taken from what's happening in a lot of local authorities, where there is, from my point of view, a really big, clear lack of understanding of what is going on for us as parents, what is going on for the child, and therefore the child protection, blame and shame critical lens comes out, and we're all destroyed even further.
Yeah. Well, that leads into a question that we've got that's come through Facebook from Lulu, um, who is very interested in your views on how we as adopters can push back enough to get the support our children need whilst protecting ourselves from the parent blame culture.
Well, I really wish I knew what the answer was. I started this, as I said, in 2022 because I was horrified of a lot of the families going through what I have now been through. One of the reasons this is different for me is because I have, as a social worker, have taken children and families to child protection conferences. So I went to my own child protection conference. I knew how to navigate it.
Yeah.
I knew what evidence was. I knew what thresholds were. It's a really, really difficult world to navigate when you're not sure of it. And that's why we as adults, as parents of children who've been through trauma, need as much support in this as possible. I don't have the answers to that question yet. I'm hoping Patch, the event in September, will highlight some answers. I'm hoping that, you know, the work that Al does, the work that I do, and so many other groups and organisations, we get to a point where parents don't have to be scared and fearful of asking for help.
Yeah. No, I think what was really interesting, you were talking about, you know, that experience you've got as a child protection social worker, having sort of that system knowledge. And so that in some ways, none of that stuff came as a surprise. You know, you were in a process that you kind of understood where it was going, why it was going there, what were their acronyms and all that stuff. And I remember, and this is maybe 2008, I remember thinking to myself, looking at one of my children, thinking, this is going to get really messy. I need to get system literate. Now that thought led to me becoming a social worker. And then me finding myself, we never went to child protection conferences. I think there was the odd strategy meeting, but we weren't invited to them. But that sense of, I know what's happening, meant that I could then concentrate on other things in terms of me sort of representing our circumstance in a really articulate way. So do you think that there's a place for, I mean, it sounds really odd to train adopters in that system and become system literate, but also a role for, is there this is just hypothesizing, a role for advocacy and people going with families, because families find themselves totally adrift in this huge, scary sea?
For me, and I suppose I haven't really considered this question, so I'm answering it off the cuff. My answer is, why should we have to have training on it, and why should we have to have advocates? Surely, actually, what we should do is put better systems in place. Good Surely, answer. What we should do is train social workers to deal with these situations better. Because if social workers come into your house and don't see what's really going on, and then they go and write their views on a piece of paper and present it to people, it's going to sound bad. The narrative of what you can't see is always going to sound worse than what's really going on. We're missing the children's needs within all of this. You know, when a social worker comes along and we end up in child protection because we're in crisis, what happens to the child? Do they get the support? No, we're talking about the child protection. We're talking about the elements of crisis. We're totally missing that actually there's another delay in this child's life again.
Yeah.
I think I went off then. Sorry.
No. I think it's legit. It's a legitimate answer, because I think, why should we? But I think that maybe the pragmatist in me says, well, maybe you're an optimist in that you want to change the system, and I kind of just want to work a way around it. And maybe there's somewhere in between, isn't there? That we also need to support, but we need a better system. I'll give you a few answers that a few people have said. So this is from Caroline Sheggold, who has been on the podcast and is a fantastic kind of voice of common sense in the midst of all of this. There needs to be a pathway specifically for when disruption happens. I guess she's talking about adoption disruption. Do LAs even have policies or training on adoption disruption?
No, they're not, as far as I know. I can't comment on every local authority. I've worked in a few now. I've done court work myself. I am not aware of any policies and processes that are aligned to adoption disruption. My ideal would be that we get in way sooner for adopters in crisis to prevent breakdown. However, I am not an optimist, and breakdowns happen. But I do think that if you can try and keep the family unit a family unit for as long as possible, even if they don't live together, then that's the best outcome all round. We're parents for life. We're not parents till 18, and I think that's another thing. So fundamentally, the lived experiences of adopters in for this instance, but wider networks as well, is key to training. It's key to creating the pathways, and it's key to creating the new policies that need to be better fit for this practice. So I am not a perfect parent. I didn't come along and think it was all going to be rosy and shiny. No, I didn't. I really didn't. But I knew when I asked for support and I didn't get any, that it wasn't good enough. And I knew when I was blamed for not managing, that's not good enough. I know hundreds of adopters now, and I know they've been blamed for not managing. We need to roll that back. We need to start at the beginning. We need to look at the early life trauma. We need to consider where parents are at. They've got secondary trauma. Have they got PTSD from being hit by their child so many times? What is their emotional well-being in that situation at that time when they're in crisis? Because if we're not considering all the elements, all we're doing is causing more harm, more drift, more delay, and more chance of breakdown.
I mean, it seems the right way of thinking is that if we can help parents be better parents, if we can support them if we can strengthen their parenting, if we can build systems around parents to support their children. So it is all child focused, that it's not that I think sometimes the criticisms is that criticism can be it's all about the adopters, which it's not. It's about helping adopters be better adopters.
So if I asked for support in 2019, and you can imagine, right, as a social worker, how long I put off asking for help.
Yeah. So
if I asked for support in 2019 and I didn't really get any, I think I've had 270 minutes with a psychotherapist and some NVR training. I've done 9 other parenting courses. So I was always trying to improve myself and improve the situation, improve the way I parent. But if I didn't get any of that support, and if I didn't get any additional support, how can I do any more to change me? I'm reflective. I asked for help from my network. I got babysitters in so I could shower. I don't believe I've done anything fundamentally wrong. I think, at times I've struggled, which who would? But none of this actually really considers the profound impacts of trauma. A child being in a forever family, is not going to heal trauma. Yeah. We're never going to heal trauma because we put a child in a family, whether it's SGO, fostering, whatever. Yes, we can make a massive difference. We can love that child can love us. There can be so much that can be profited for everybody because there's a family. However, it won't heal all of the trauma, and we fundamentally have to look at that core element and where parents are at and where the child is at and what support would make things better, because throwing in outreach for 2 hours a week,
it's a pea in an ocean, isn't it, basically?
Exactly.
And I do wonder whether in terms of maybe we are getting onto area above our pay grade, but I think that it then starts to question the ethics. Well, I think where's the ethics in recruiting people into a system that we know is struggling to support the needs Absolutely. Of a large proportion of the children. Now, you could argue that, we could argue the percentage, but the Adoption UK barometer said, 2/3 of families experience challenging behaviour at some point, violent and challenging behaviour. But we also know that, when you drill down into the statistics, I think the vast majority of children have experienced neglect and adversity, maybe not physical, abuse, but neglect is this huge pool that the children are drawn from. But we also know that is probably one of the greatest risk factors Absolutely. For challenging behavior. That neglect isn't this sort of soft option for children. It's got huge implications for child development that then ripple across in ways that other forms of abuse don't. So
Yeah.
So should adoption continue? There's a big question. No, don't answer that unless you want to answer that.
The answer
You're
is
an
yes.
advocate. Right.
The answer is yes, because the love is real for most of us. I couldn't love my children any more than I do, and my parents couldn't love me any more than they do, and vice versa, and whichever way round you want to put it. But we have to get it better, and we have to get it right, and we have to make sure that what we are doing isn't causing more harm to more people.
Yeah, I've got some great comments from Julie Pye. People who are listening to this back as a podcast later in the week. Julie said she's sort of arguing the toss that actually advocacy and independent support is something that she feels is really important, and I know that she works supporting individuals. So that's interesting. I'm trying to think. There's lots of other comments I'm coming through.
It's not that I don't agree with that.
Right.
It's just, I suppose for me, my focus is on changing the pathway.
Right. Which actually leads nicely into this. There's some great comments. So people who are listening back later, then please go and read the comments and keep the conversation going, because I think it's a really hot potato. A few months ago, you came to me and you said, "Hey, I've got an idea, a cunning plan, a plan so cunning you could pin a tail on it and call it a fox," to quote Blackadder, about having a conference to look at some of the issues that we're thinking in terms of the system. How do we affect the system, and how do we create systems? So tell me about your cunning plan and what we're doing.
I think it was February. I don't know. But I remember, and I like checking things out with you, Al, because you'll put me straight. And I said I think we should get people around the table, but virtually, because we all live in very different places.
Yeah.
And let's talk about it. Let's get people communicating, listening to I don't like selling myself, but me and you talking about some of the issues, and other people talking about some of the issues, and let's get it laid bare on a table in front of everybody and say, these are what our concerns are, our worries are, this is what we want for the future, this is what we want changed, and try and get people to take notice and act, maybe not specifically make a promise there and then at the event, but take it away and think about what can they do to make change. I haven't met one single person. I've spoken to hundreds of people over the last 18 months about what patch represents, and I haven't met anybody who can come up with an argument and say I'm wrong. Not. Do you know what I mean? So I know that there's lots of people. I've met with lots of different local authorities, some amazing ones, who agree change is needed.
I mean, I find it fascinating because I think one of the reasons, probably like you do, I meet a lot of people who've been really quite hurt by the system, and a lot of people are quite passionate about changing the system, but oftentimes that can be sort of focused in on things that I think are not particularly going to affect change. They're going to be, sometimes it's about getting justice for a specific circumstance or a specific kind of a tiny aspect of the system. So what I was interested in terms of us sort of co-producing this conference, there's a good word, isn't it? Co-production. There's a comment about co-production, Lulu, thank you, is this idea that we start to have this conversation with how do regional adoption agencies and I guess voluntary adoption agencies, how do they interact with child protection or children and family services? Because you've got these 32 regional adoption agencies plus a few strands. You've got 150 plus child protection or local authorities who've got who hold the duty for child protection. But so often families find themselves sort of drawn into the local authority protection systems, children and family support system, without the regional adoption agency or their post-adoption support worker being invited along to that process, or potentially just not even aware it's happening. And they often hold an awful lot of the knowledge about the child and the family. And so I guess we were just really keen to have this conversation about, can we, on a really basic level, just get some sort of agreement? It was as simple as that, wasn't it?
And it was. And I think getting an agreement around the issues, it isn't about being negative. It's about building better pathways, collaboration between RAA and local authority. It's not the child protection social worker taking the lead, it's partnership. But it's not just that partnership between RAA and LA, it's the partnership with parents, it's the partnership with schools, it's partnership with experts. But another fundamental area for me of concern, and I may be being a little bit critical here, is that the wrong people are driving the wrong vehicle. So for me, we should have, sorry, I
No,
have
it's
a
okay.
better.
I'm intrigued by that that metaphor. Go for it.
Okay, so there's a train driver piloting a plane, right? What we need is trauma experts, neuroscientists, psychologists, etc., specialists determining what best is suited for children who've experienced trauma and what is best placed to parent, working to care plan around an open table with the people who are living with that situation, whether the child's old enough to be there or not, or whether somebody can advocate for the child, because that's massively important. We need people to agree, to be open, to listen, to work in partnership, to collaborate, to be open to learning more about the situations that I've lived in, that you've lived in, that hundreds of people are living in day to day, which is not easy. It's nearly finished me off. You know, it's heartbreaking what families are going through, and we need better.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to spend a few minutes in some of the Facebook groups. Patch has got a Facebook group. You've got your website. He said plugging the website for you. What's it called? Patch at
Our Patch, it's called .org.uk.
ourpatch.org.uk, and go there, and then there's a collection of.
I apologise. Al tells me all the time.
It's fine. No, I just think I totally agree with you. I think that we just it's this opportunity to try and have a different conversation and create a. I don't want to say a system, but maybe a protocol that says, if a family says, "Oh, you do know that we're adoptive parents," that someone goes, "All right, okay, there's maybe other people we should be drawing into this conversation, because they will know your child's history in a way that is really present. They'll have a really good sense of the story, because that then gives a context. And if you've got a context, everything looks different, doesn't it? Or potentially.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to repeat yourself 1,500 times, and you shouldn't have to prove what you're saying. And there needs to be some compassion, empathy, some dignity paid into this. We need to understand things better, but we shouldn't have to repeat it 15 times. Can't tell you how many assessments my children have been through, and yet we still got nothing. So where did that help? Assessments aren't interventions. We need a pathway, but we need it to be built by people who understand the journey that we're on, but the journey the child is on as well. And so whether that is through advocacies or panels or what, I don't know. When I was going through, I asked for a crisis meeting with the people who were in my children's lives, who knew my children, and experts who I'd paid for to work with me, and it got declined. And for me, that I just don't get it. You shouldn't be blocking progress.
Yeah, or people who've got knowledge that's pertinent to the conversation. Independent people. And I think that's what I would hope, that we can get to a place where those people will be invited around the table. And I think that you and I, both being system literate, we're able to maybe pull some levers that other people are just not. Because the reality is that we're not talking about people in a vacuum. We're talking about people who maybe at the end of several very difficult years, where lots of things are going on in their household. And so being able to kind of turn up at a meeting and think rationally is often really, really difficult and highly improbable. So the professionals needs to just be aware of that and support them in that. And
I think it's interesting, because as a social worker who and I did get a lot of domestic violence cases, I know that when you go and work with somebody who's exhausted, who's battered, who's in an absolute crisis of a nature that is even domestic abuse and domestic violence is still, people are still learning about gaslighting and things like that. So it's a different conversation. If you go in there with the child protection lens with a victim of domestic abuse, you're never going to make progress. Well, you have to build empathy and compassion and understanding to get a foot through the door in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I look at some of my experiences and think, my goodness, social work practice really missed the. I remember being in a meeting, and it's never happened to me before or since. And I remember this, like, actually recounting some things and going faint. And I've never, I don't do that, faint, and almost thinking I'm going to pass out. And me saying, I think I'm going to pass out. And they went, all right, okay. And just, and I thought, if someone said that in a meeting I was in, I'd go, oh, let's just pause the meeting. Let's get you a glass of water. Let's see if you're okay. And you think that they were so focused on the task and the protocol and the procedure that they stopped seeing people. We as a family, and I'm not trying to get people to feel sorry for me, but it was just a really peculiar experience that it was only months later that I realized that had happened. I kind of thought, wow, that was amazing. But people were so caught up in the process, they couldn't actually see the people just for those few minutes.
Absolutely. But they're not seeing the children either. And my daughter now, she didn't want to see another social worker, because the social worker twisted her words, and she's angry, she's frustrated. And how sad's that? She remembers social workers removing from her birth family, and now she's got a bad taste in the mouth of social workers again. And it's just, we've got to stop this. We've got to support families and fight for progress, but in a really positive, let's move it forward, not I don't want somebody to apologize to me. I don't want somebody to say, actually, we could have done things better. What I want is it better for families in the future.
Yeah. And we don't want social workers' heads on spikes, because I think that we're both social workers. I think social workers, I can't think of any bad examples. I think everyone's doing their best. And I think we've got a system that's set against them as well. So tell me more about this conference. Who's going to be speaking?
Me.
Well, I know you're going to be speaking. Who else is going to be speaking? Oh, yeah, and me as well. Well, I think what I'm keen is that I don't want to be there to speak about my experience. I would like to be in a position to draw in the experience of lots of people and just sort of be a bit of a blank canvas and sort of reflect on the impact.
This isn't about my journey either. This is about the journey of adopters who've reached crisis and been blamed and shamed. Sorry, horrible words. We've also got Sarah Jahal, who's Adoption England. I think, what is the official title? Strategic lead.
She's in charge. Shall we just put in that she's in charge of all adoption in all of England? She's probably reject that title, but we'll give her it anyway.
Yeah, and she's fab. And then we've got your friend Vicky.
So we've got Vicky McEwen, who is a social worker and a kind of a practitioner that works directly with children and has got a lot of experience working with children who are adopted. And so I think we really want to ensure that everything we talk about in the days is centered around the welfare of children, but set in the context of the welfare of families. I was going to say earlier, I did a little, this is how boring my evenings are. I went through all of the safeguarding policies of about 8 or 9 regional adoption agencies, and I looked up adult safeguarding and I couldn't find it. There's not one mention of adult safeguarding. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting, knowing what I know. So it's all these little things about, we've called it family safe, safeguarding adoption, just this idea of safeguarding everyone, safeguarding them from the system, safeguarding the system from them and everything. So it's a free event, isn't it? It's at 9:30 till 1 o'clock on the 24th of September. It will be available afterwards as well. We'll break it up into small audio clips for the speakers, and we'll get that'll be available on the Patch website, I believe, our Patch website.
I'm also going to compile a list of people who want me to send it to them. So happy Excellent. To do
that. It's available on Eventbrite, and we'll put the link in the show notes, but also in the Facebook page as well. It's already on there. And please come along. And even if you can only come for an hour and catch up, or just dip in and take what you can from it.
Send it to your RAA, your LA, or anybody who feels professionally invested in this area. We have got so many people come in, and it's just really, really gone down so well that we're having this, and I'm really pleased. Although I am a little bit scared.
Why are you a little bit scared?
It's just a lot of talking in it and thinking on your feet, and I like not being negative, but sometimes my gobshiteness just comes out of me.
Well, I'm saying nothing because I'm universally accepting of you. No, I think we're a smorgasbord, and we bring that kind of that lived experience, and you've got that unique perspective, and so you're almost indestructible because you've sat around every corner of the table, haven't you?
I have.
Fiona, you have. Fiona, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I have to say, there's some fantastic comments on the Caroline Schegel's put another long comment there, which are really insightful about therapeutic interventions and social workers kind of meddling in that, which I think is fascinating.
Absolutely.
I'm really disappointed Scott couldn't be here tonight because I always thought he'd be really impressed that after hours of trying, I've managed to get the podcast background on my video image.
Well done. Well done. Round of applause for you.
Yeah, I had one job. Thank you. Small round of applause. And I thought he would have been really pleased, but he's missed that. So that, God bless him. So I'm going to say goodbye to you and thank you to everyone who's joined in. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.